There's dramatic new reporting about a clash between the president and his Secretary of Defense. The Washington Post reporting Trump and Pete Hegseth butted heads over munitions shortages that now threaten to limit military options with Iran. That's two sources familiar telling the Post Trump thought that problem had been fixed. The White House and Pentagon are pushing back on this reporting. And in a late night social media post, the president argued, quote, the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions and that more were being manufactured and shipped. At the same time, he's calling those stories fake. He's slamming, quote, leakers of what he called treasonous statements, saying the sources of those leaks will be hunted down and deserved long-term jail sentences. Tom Nichols and Tim O'Brien are back with us. Tom, the administration has pushed back on this WAPO reporting, but does the episode reveal more about the difficulty that they're facing in trying to wrap their arms around this war that they are clearly struggling to find an end to?
They're struggling because they're losing, and it's interesting that the president's position is this is completely fake, but also a dangerously treasonous leak of something that is obviously true. So the problem here is that they think that just executing operations over and over and over again will somehow produce the result they want, even though for 5 months that hasn't been the case. And so we're using up stocks of very expensive weapons that were never meant for this kind of a war, of knocking down cheap drones that we were saving for places like Europe and Asia. I think the most important part of that story is Hegseth being very Trump-like and trying to throw his own deputy under the bus about why this is happening. The Deputy Secretary of Defense usually runs the Pentagon on a day-to-day basis. Knowing this stuff is the Secretary of Defense's job, but because they don't have a strategy, they don't know what they're doing, they're obviously losing this war. The infighting has begun, and the bickering is now going to spill out into the public, as sometimes happens in cases like this.
Yeah, because it's not just the fact that there might be a munitions shortage, which frankly is not a secret, has been talked about on the Hill, has been true since the early part of sending aid to Ukraine. It's been an active conversation in military circles, but then also during testimonies on the Hill from relevant cabinet officials over the course of the last few years, including Hegseth in recent months. But it's the other issue of the fact that Hegseth may have misled the president, and that might be why he's casting blame on his deputy. But Tim, I'm wondering if this just shifts the spotlight onto Hegseth, because there have been moments where people on the Hill have been clear, Tom Tillis included, that say, I regret my vote to confirm him for various reasons. But he has also been one of the people who has continued driving home the same points about continued aggression in Iran and somehow that bringing different results, just like Trump. And I'm wondering if this administration starts looking for someone to eventually throw under the bus. Does it end up being Hegseth?
Of course, that's a possibility. Of course, it's exactly what Trump is thinking, because two things are problematic here, and whichever one they are, we don't know yet. But either Hegseth gave Trump the accurate information that U.S. munitions are perilously low, and Trump chose to ignore it, or Hegseth misled the president because he didn't want to deliver bad news. And this gets back to what Tom and I were kicking around in the prior block, that this is either a Soviet structure or a Tsarist structure. But the reality is people in Trump's inner circle are telling him what he wants to hear or are misleading him. And in this case, it has really, really dramatic real-world consequences. They have wasted a treasure trove of U.S. weaponry in Iran. They've left Ukraine, which now is so low on interceptors that they can't defend themselves against incoming Soviet or Russian attacks. They've moved the THAAD missile system from Korea into the Middle East, and that leaves our allies in East Asia exposed to Chinese aggressions. All of the knockoff effects of this misguided, ignorant policy that was done simply because Donald Trump took Bibi Netanyahu at his word and then pursued a war in which we've lost American lives, we spent American money, we've blown through American munitions, and we're stuck.
Yeah, right, because the exit ramp is the thing that they are struggling with the most. And the other person who initially was one of the voices saying, hey, we might not want to do this for a whole number of reasons, including the fact that one of the central tenets of being America first, as Trump campaigned on it, was not beginning new foreign entanglements or wars. And that's exactly where they are right now. I'm talking, of course, about Vice President Vance, who has been the face of talks with Iran, and the president, and who President Trump has said, joking, maybe not, that he'll blame Vance if there isn't a good deal. I want to play some of what Vance told Fox News just last night.
You have people who will attack what the president of the United States has said, but they don't want to use his name because they know that the president of the United States is too big a fish for them. So they'll come after me or they'll come after somebody else in the administration. That's my job, Laura. And if the worst thing that happens over the next couple of years is that I take some flack for the president in order to make his administration more successful, I think he'll be happy about that.
I mean, Tom, that is his job as vice president. That's true for other vice presidents as well. But there's a step further here, too, right? The way that Vance, who was against this privately, has now really been pushed into the spotlight to be the person defending it continuously.
Well, two things. One is, there isn't anybody in Trump's orbit who hasn't had to mortgage their soul for pennies on the dollar at this point, no matter what they may have believed or said or once claimed to believe. They've had to put it all on the altar of Donald Trump's ego. But the other part of this is, it's the vice president's job to take heat. A trade deal goes bad, inflation goes up. Normally, you don't want to see the president and the vice president that far apart during a war. You didn't want to see, George W. Bush turning to Dick Cheney and saying, well, if it goes wrong, I'm going to blame him. Mm-hmm. You didn't want to see, Ronald Reagan in Grenada saying, well, if this thing gets hairy, talk to George Bush. It's one thing for vice presidents to be a heat shield for unpopular policies. It's another thing to have this kind of division in the Oval Office during a war where American lives are at risk.
I think that's a great point. And then you layer on top of it the idea that for Vance, this is something he will have to carry with him for whatever his future aspirations are, including but not limited to potentially being president.
And he's trying to keep both of those doors open at the same time. Sure. He clearly wants to run. Mm-hmm. He clearly knows he can't alienate Trump because Trump will get him savage during the primaries, even if he can make it to the general election, which he probably can't without Trump's support in 2028. But precisely what Tom was saying, this is a ecosystem populated by zombies who've given up their independence and their own ethical compasses to basically serve Trump.
At a point where the Iran war, politically speaking, nothing to say of the economic and treasure cost, right? The number of human lives that have been lost. But politically, a very unpopular thing. The thing Republican strategists continue saying to me is the thing they are the most worried about as the midterm elections get closer. Tom Nichols, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon.